Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And yes, I know I've been away for a little bit. I was trying to take a week off to recharge, and then in the middle of that week, there was a death in the family, so I had to go do a whole bunch of traveling. I still feel awful from all of that, and I'm still recovering from all of that, but I figured, I might as well get a YouTube video out so people would know I'm still alive. And it sucks that this month sucks because I'm part of a very cool reading event, which is Escape the Readathon, which is run by Lexi from Books with Lexi. And that participating in that readathon has been great. It's everything else in life that just is not being nice to me this month. But regardless, because of Escape the Readathon, I've seen a lot of people start doing their top 10 horror books. So I was like, oh, I've never done one of these. What better way to, come back from, a 2-week hiatus than, wow, these are my top 10 favorite horror books. I'm using favorite instead of best just because, I don't know, I don't want people in the comments being like, well, from a structural level. I don't care. This is my opinions. And we'll just get into it. So my number 10 for my favorite horror books, and there's a reason why this is 10, and it's a little bit lower on the list, but still makes the top 10, and that is It by Stephen King. I chose to only have one Stephen King on here. I tried to get only one of each author that I'm going to be talking about, even if there were a few from said author that I liked, just for the fact of, variety and spice of life. And I chose It, and it is a very flawed book in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things reading it from a modern perspective that don't hold up, but I still think that this is my favorite coming of age book I've ever written, because it's not really about reveling in nostalgia. It's more about trying to earnestly unpack the horrors of the past in a way that I think is much more complex and interesting than most books of its ilk. So it's a lot about childhood trauma and how we deal with it and what scares us as children and what it means to be these times sucked, but the connections you made during those terrible times, that's awesome that you could still it's valuing the connections and the friendships over valuing the era that they were in. So I think that this is probably the only what I think is an ethical nostalgia thing that doesn't lead to some very bad political ideas. Now, again, this book is not perfect. I think this book is trying to talk about the cycle of hatred and the cycle of abuse and all these things. And it's going to some very dark places. Does it nail every single bit of ground that it tries to tackle? No, and I can see, especially if you're reading this from a modern perspective, certain aspects are not going to be what you would be expecting from, a book that's going to be tackling subjects like... He tries to talk about things like homophobia and racism in a way it's clear that someone who has not experienced those in his own life. So it's laudable to me that he's trying to go out and tackle some of these ideas, but he doesn't always land them. I don't think that devalues the work itself. Like I said, I think this has got a lot of heart and great elements to it. Now, it's funny because I think Pet Sematary is probably the best Stephen King book, and you might be wondering, why is that not on, the horror list? And it's because, honestly, Pet Sematary is more of, an open sore. There are horrible things and horror elements in there, but it's just an open wound of a book that's just so damn depressing. And this book is very depressing, but it has a lot of other very fun stuff in it that makes it a thrill to read. Oh, and also there's that chapter near the end that you should just skip. Anyway, so that's it. An imperfect book, but a book that I think is an important book that really kind of tries to tackle what it is to grow up in a way that isn't just oh, I love the past. And I cannot stand that, because most coming-of-age books I read are all about, wow, wasn't it so cool when we were all coming of age? And I'm like, bleh. Also, Pennywise the Dancing Clown is a lady. Everyone forgets that it is a lady. So, it is a girl boss. Eat all them children. Girl boss Pennywise. Anyways, next up, this is number 9. This is Nightwing by Martin Cruz Smith. This is my favorite animal attack book because it does everything a good animal attacks book does, where it's tackling a whole bunch of societal issues through the realm of an animal attacks book. And unlike other books of its ilk, because, Rats by James Herbert is the other big one for animal attack fans, and that one is clearly like an angry white middle class man writing this, whereas Martin Cruz Smith is an indigenous person and he is writing about issues in the indigenous community, and he is writing it and tackling it through the lens of an animal attacks book. I think this book is extremely angry. I do kind of really admire books that have like a very specific point and are very, very pointedly angry about an event and a way things are going and the way society has been built. It's much more interesting to look through that of a lens that isn't a middle class white man, which is what most, if not, I would say like 90% of other animal attacks books are doing, where they're tackling societal issues from the perspective of like, a middle class white dude. And, you can only listen to so many of those rants. Now, again, animal attacks as a genre is interesting because you do have to consider that there could be some real life consequences between making an animal attacks book. For example, this is a killer bats book, and I did see some people online that are like, "Whoa, this is not what bats are like. Bats are normally cool, and you can't say they're evil, blah, blah, blah." Which the environmentalist in me is like, yeah, you're right, they're not, they're just animals. But, like, I think that there should be, like, if you're a reasonable person reading a book about killer animals, you should know that it's not an accurate representation of said animal. And unlike something like Jaws, which I know had like a huge impact on the shark community, like Jaws the book and Jaws the movie, like show so many sharks died from that, and that's horrible because that was a movie, that was a book about an animal. That's not how it was really like, and it's just weird that people. There would be an interesting discussion to have one day about like what is the responsibility of an animal attacks writer when it comes to its potential environmental harm that comes from it. But besides that, I just think this is a great book. There's some awesome characters in this. Every character has so much depth to them. Some set pieces are just outstanding. I absolutely love Nightwing by Martin Cruz Smith. Next up, my favorite, just normal ass monster book. There's a few other books with monsters in it, but the one that I think is just like the purest, like this is a monster book where there's a cool creature rampaging through a town and everything that comes along with it, and that is Robert R. McCammon's Stinger. Now, I'm a little bit worried because I participated in a Secret Satan, and which is basically just with a whole bunch of other booktubers where like you recommended your favorite books to another booktuber, and I recommended someone Stinger, so I'm a little bit worried to see if other people love this book as much as I do, but that video will be coming out tomorrow, my video as well as the video where someone is going to be talking about Stinger, so I'm a little bit nervous to see if they like it as much as I do, but regardless, this is a amazing book, because this is like an alien comes, and the alien is not nice. It's like a mean alien that's just going to destroy a town. And, like, it's hunting this other alien, because it's basically, Stinger is like this, like, alien bounty hunter that's, like, gonna show up and just take out, completely, like, demolish a town in search of its goal. And it, like, creates, like, a force field around this, like, little New Mexico town and just rampages throughout it. And it is so well written. The characters are so good. I love all the characters in this. This book basically asks, what if the worst person you ever knew ended up saving the world? Like, what if a legitimately terrible person ended up saving the world, and how would you deal with that? And I think that is a really interesting question to be left with after this book. Now, again, Robert R. McCammon is like a white dude trying to write about racism. Does it always work here? I don't know if it always works. I think that his heart is in the right place, and I think that it's laudable that he's trying to tackle these bigger issues. especially in the period that it was written. So I do think his heart is in the right place, and he does do his best. Now, there is a use of one word that we don't use anymore in this, but it only comes up once. It is very jarring and completely ruins the scene that it's in. But it's there's only one moment of that, and I just think this is a very powerful book. I did end up kind of crying at the end of this book, which is a very surprising, considering that this is like a true blue alien F's things up book. And, the creatures are awesome. And, the main villain is so cool. It's so menacing. And, it's wild. There's, freaking helicopter chases. There's, this scene in a bar, which is, my favorite. A creature shows up at a bar and just destroys everything. And you're like, wow, this is awesome. And it has this amazing cover. Unfortunately, this is available everywhere else. But, I don't know what was going on with whoever authorized the covers, because the Audible cover for this is an audiobook looks terrible. No one would ever go to it. It looks terrible. It's just a bunch of lines, and you're like, why did you do this when you have the literal coolest cover in history? Anyways, that's neither here nor there. I just think this is a really awesome creature feature that has heart to it and has great characters and has 3 dimensions. And I do love Robert R. McCammon, even though, people think I don't just because I hate Swan Song, okay? I think Swan Song is a terrible book, but I like all of his other books, okay? I like him a lot. Next up, those are the only books that I have physically, which is interesting. Next up is my favorite Grady Hendrix book, and that is My Best Friend's Exorcism. Now, this is a book that you probably have heard if you've been on BookTube long enough, especially the horror side. My Best Friend's Exorcism has come up quite a bit. I really had to sit down and try to think what was my favorite Grady Hendrix book, because I love Grady Hendrix. I love his stuff. His writing and his writing style, I just think is mwah, chef's kiss. His humor always works for me, and he has a really interesting way of talking about characters that I just absolutely love. So I absolutely love My Best Friend's Exorcism. I think, and I don't like Exorcism. I think that this is probably the one to choose for Grady Hendrix, because this is a genre that I do not care about. Typically, exorcisms are not something I'm interested in. I am as atheist as it comes. I definitely don't believe in anything about the Catholic Church. And there's all these elements of religious horror that just doesn't work for me normally. And Grady Hendrix somehow makes it work. Somehow takes a genre that I have absolutely zero interest in and weaves a very meaningful and impactful tale. And I think what gets it on this list is that epilogue. There's an epilogue to this, and I think that epilogue is just outstanding. Beautiful epilogue, and I love it dearly. So My Best Friend's Exorcism is so good. Next up, this one might be a surprise to people. Was a surprise to me when I was kind of sitting down and trying to think about my list. And this is Alice Isn't Dead by Joseph Fink. Now, this started life as a podcast, and it was a really, really good podcast. And then the entire story got turned into a novel that you can just read on its own without seeing the podcast at all. It's just, there's something about Joseph Fink, because I love Jeffrey Craner and Joseph Fink's podcast, Welcome to Night Vale. There have been quite a few Night Vale books, and I've loved all of them that I've read. But there's something specifically about Alice Isn't Dead that is specifically impactful to me that I think is just really, really good. And it's basically a story about this woman who loses her wife Alice, and she's going across the country driving trucks, she's a truck driver looking for Alice. And it is just really, really fascinating, and the ways that it kind of explores road, what is life like on the road, and then the plot that gets I don't want to spoil anything, because a lot of it is there's some real creepy stuff in here, and it all kind of slowly and gradually kind of unfurls as the plot goes on. I don't know if I've heard of anyone else who has read Alice Isn't Dead. It's a book and a podcast that I recommend to people all the time, and I'm really excited to reread this. It has been a few years since I read this book, so it's one of those things where I think it's 6 instead of being a little bit higher, is just because I fairly certain I need to revisit this and make sure it does have the same impact on me. But yeah, there was just something about this woman truck driving through the United States and going through all these like back roads and back towns and all these like weird little experiences that happened as she was looking for Alice. It captures time and a place really well and has this really interesting setting, and I just really, really love Alice Isn't Dead. So yeah, that is my number 6. My number 5 is Halloween Slaughter, which is by Sergio Gomez, and this is the creme de la creme of slasher novels. Now, there is a book higher on here that is a slasher novel. It's marketed as a slasher novel. I kind of think it's more than just a slasher novel. This one, Halloween Slaughter by Sergio Gomez, though, is just a true blue slasher book. And this is actually a sequel to Camp Slaughter. And I liked Camp Slaughter. I thought Camp Slaughter was a fine, fun little book to read. But I think Halloween Slaughter is like a masterpiece. It captures, I love the slasher genre. I know it's like kind of hit and miss with people, but it is one of my favorite subgenres of both film and books now. But I find that in books, though, it can be hard to write a really good slasher novel. Especially, it's the same problem with TV shows, right? When a television show tries to tell a slasher story, it's the amount of time that you have to expand upon. Whereas slashers are normally very quick, gritty, dirty affairs where they're like 90 minutes to 79 minutes a lot of times, and they're very quick movies, and turning that into another genre or medium can be very, very difficult. And I think Sergio Gomez nails it here, because Halloween Slaughter just creates these great characters that you absolutely love. I loved every single character in this, even the characters that you weren't really supposed to love, where there's like a mean girl that you're supposed to like not really like that much, and I'm like, no, like I even liked her a lot and I don't want anything bad to happen to her. So it really created this great friend group of these people in their early 20s trying to find themselves, trying to find what they believe in, what they think life is going to be like. And then the slashing happens. Then they become the victim to a slasher. And it is so interesting because it really makes you think of what it means to watch slasher films, because it's really just like the tragedy of death coming to people in their youth. And you could expand that to mean whatever. Like, there are so many different forms of violence and death that happens to people who are young, whether it's car crashes, disease, just in general, just guns, anything, right? It can be a hard world out there, especially to be taken down in your youth. And that is what primarily the slasher genre has always been about. And I think that Halloween Slaughter nails that by making you really care for these kids, and you just want everything to be okay, and it's not. And it really... Sergio Gomez makes you love these characters and then delivers some of the most brutal kills that, like, in a normal slasher like book, you'd be like, wow, that was totally awesome. He just took that head and threw it at that other head. And then you're like reading it in this book, you're like, oh no, she had hopes and dreams. I didn't want her to die. And it's like, it was very impactful. And it was just very impressive. So I think it's the best pure slasher novel of all time, and it is a masterpiece. That's Halloween Slaughter by Sergio Gomez. Next up is Near the Bone by Christina Henry. I love this book. This book is one of the books that I read right before I started BookTube, so I don't know if I've ever talked about this, but this is such a impactful, amazing novel with an amazing setting, amazing creature. There's like a creature feature in this, but like the reason why I said that Stinger was my only like pure creature feature, because this is a book about human monsters, like a lot. So this book is about a woman who lives in this isolated cabin with a man who has like abuses and like had kidnapped her as a kid and is like holding her hostage, and then something comes out of the woods and it's like there's like a creature involved, and it's like this. I don't know if there's ever been a better novel that really just puts its main character through the absolute ringer, and you like feel every step and broken bone and broken body that she has to go through to get through this experience. And it's impactful, it's wild, there's some crazy scenes in this. The main monster, which is the fucking husband, is the most, he's so scary, he's so terrifying, and it's just a scary ass book about a woman in the snow surviving all types of monsters in the dark. And it's really well written. I need to read more of Christina Henry's books. I haven't read any more of her books, so I really need to check out more. But Near the Bone is an absolute masterpiece, and is such a gut punch in so many ways. It is a book that will really play with your emotions, that's for sure. Oy, oy, oy. Next up is Drawing Blood by Poppy Z. Bright. I know. I read this last month, so that's the reason why it's like number 3, because I gotta let it sit with me for a while. But I loved this book. So I read this book for Trans Girl April. If you don't know, Poppy Z. Bright is a trans man, and he wrote this book, and it is just, oh my god. See, every time, like, modern splatterpunk, splatterpunk as like a genre signifier has like lost its luster, because like back in the 90s and the 80s, like when you wrote splatterpunk, you were like actually going against a horribly unjust system, and like what it meant to be punk and what that genre signifier meant was actually a bunch of really, really progressive books. And like now every time someone mentions a splatterpunk book, you're like, they're written by like a 40-year-old man who's like, man, I don't get age because I could say slurs. And it's like, oh, I hate what splatterpunk has become. But back in the day, splatterpunk was like, this is what punk is. And Drawing Blood is one of the most like, this is in the early 90s, and this book is like super progressive, and it ages like fine wine. The ideas and the topics that Poppy Z. Bright is talking about in this book is just so good. And I think what it's not really a full horror book, to be completely fair, because a lot of this book is just kind of like this really sweet relationship, but it's like a relationship that's like built on the destruction of the nuclear family, and what has these two people who have had these horrible upbringings finding each other and helping each other make it through these horrible, horrible things that have happened to them in their own lives. And it's just so heartbreaking, but then it lifts your spirits up, and it's so good. The writing is just so amazing. It's so good. This is my first Poppy Z. Bright book, and I will be reading a lot more of his work because, oh my goodness, I absolutely loved this book. It's the plot, it would be very hard to summarize. So if you're interested in this, I would just recommend you take a chance to go in there. It's very dark at the start though. Like it goes into some dark topics. So just, this is a horror list. So just be aware. It gets grim dark. And then, then you see the sun and you're like, wow, love exists. Oh my. Anyways, I found it a very impactful, beautiful book. So it's my third favorite horror book of all time. My number 2 is another slasher book, but like, is it? And this is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I love this book. This book is amazing. And I think this is more of like a character piece. And it is like there are slasher elements, but it's not like a pure slasher. It's like a horror novel where slasher elements are happening, and the main character loves slasher novels. But I think what makes this book so good is that you're following this young teenager, Jade Daniels, as she's like kind of a coming of age, and she's getting put through the ringer, and just her life in this small town, and then something shows up and starts killing people. So something is killing people in the town she lives in. And oh man, there's like I love this book because there is this element of unreliable narration throughout, because you find out the truth about Jane Daniels' life by the end of this book, and it floored me. It was so like emotionally tough to read, and it was really impactful, and it's just this is a fantastic book. I absolutely love it, and I love a lot of Stephen Graham Jones's work. I love the sequel to this, Don't Fear the Reaper, which was just awesome. Yeah, I really like that book as well. Only Good Indians was another great one that I really enjoyed. And last, but certainly not least, my number one horror book of all time is The Auctioneer by Joan Sampson. This is a quiet horror. Like, this is a slow burn horror book. It takes its time. It's just really atmospheric, and it's saying a lot of important things about policing, about life in small towns, and how the world was changing in the 1980s and not for the better. And it really is a gut punch of a book, but it's really a slow character piece book where, like, if you're a person who's into fast-paced horror, you're probably not going to like this because it takes its time. It's building a world. The horror happens very gradually and very slowly, and it's like one thing after the other, and it's like a slow degradation, and it's just absolutely beautifully written. Joan Sampson, this was her only book. She didn't write any more novels, but well, hell if she didn't write an amazing one for her one and only work in the genre. I absolutely love this. This makes Paperbacks from Hell completely worth it, because this is a book I would never have read if not for Paperbacks from Hell by Grady Hendrix. And yes, there is a lot of terrible, terrible books in that book. The Auctioneer is the exception that proves it was worth it. It's all that collected, all that looking for those things is worth it, because The Auctioneer is such an amazing book, amazing gut punch. If you have not read it, basically the log line is there's a small town. This man shows up and basically starts to come to people's houses and is like, "Hey, I'm holding an auction. Do you have anything that you can donate?" And they donate some stuff to the auction, and then it slowly gets more and more. He's taking more. Suddenly it stops becoming optional to come and take and supply things for the auction. He starts putting all this money that he got from the auction into policing, and there's just this rampant over-policing that's happening in this small community, and it's just slowly giving up everything that you own and everything that you are, and you have no choice, and you just give away to everything. And it's really, really impactful. It's really interesting, and I love it. So what are your favorite horror books of all time? So have a good day. Bye.